Hello, so I'm Anna. I'm also at the University of Nottingham doing my Part 2 Masters. I've just started my 6th year, and this is my final project from 5th year. It's another co-housing scheme. I think we've all learnt that University of Nottingham loves a co-housing scheme. It was the same brief that Jeff previously had as well, but a different site. My site was based literally right next door, right where Ocean Nightclub is, if anybody knows Ocean Nightclub. And we also used the Heatherwick master plan for the Broadmarsh, so basically knocking down the whole of the Broadmarsh, but keeping the concrete frame in for an activity hub. These are a few pictures of the site at the minute. It's not the prettiest. Probably the best part is the Carrington Street facade. The rest of it is kind of like back of house buildings where they do the bins, deliveries. You wouldn't really want to be walking down it late at night. And for my design, a big driver of it was the narrative and the historical context. So we were asked to find an artistic precedent, and one that I managed to find actually was Sir John Charles Robinson, who was born on Carrington Street, a bit further down the road. But when was he born? In 1824. So he was alive when the site was in slum housing, so back-to-back housing, miniature courtyards, a few routes through, but not very many. And he actually worked as an architect for a bit before getting into etching and becoming quite a fancy title of Surveyor of the Queen's Pictures, and was knighted in 1887. So I wanted to take his life as a main driver. He was orphaned at a young age and raised by his grandparents and was a young creative. So these are where my user groups come from. He's young creative professionals and young families to use my co-housing scheme in the centre of Nottingham, along with combining present-day architecture of the Heatherwick's frame, which is going to create an activity hub for creatives right next to the site, and then a large green heart, so bring nature and biodiversity back into the built-up area. And then on the right is a picture of the slum housing that he probably would have grown up in, so not the nicest of conditions, but I tried to take some positives from it, maybe like a one size fits all, but then I try to flip that on its head. One size fits all, but how can it adapt itself to everybody in its own way? So there are a few key things about site. The marsh wall cuts through it and changes the historic grain of the site, and then there's also these routes through, but I'll explain that more in a minute. Design development, so the Carrington Street buildings are on a conservation area, so I wanted to keep them. And Albion House is a listed building, so I didn't demolish them. But the other two buildings, I decided they were going to be demolished, but I'd keep the bricks and reuse them in my project. I wanted to follow existing lines of sight, create the routes through, similar to, I guess, etching them out of the site. And then, because it's such a dense area, I wanted to increase the density of it and build above the Carrington Street buildings so that you could see the development from all angles. And then it wasn't quite sitting right with me, the master plan, so I went back and realigned it with history. So I found the historic grain of the sites and added the awkwardness of it to realign it with the history and Sir John Charles Robinson. So this is what I kind of ended up with. I'll go more into it, but you can kind of see it's this long snaking building. White is existing, and then the color is new. Quickly on the facade, so if you remember the marsh wall, below it I decided to do this beyond the wall, darker colors. It was where a marsh actually used to be on the site, and above it a much lighter, homely, warm colors. And you can see the little the brick insets. So these would be decorative features where maybe the bricks that were demolished, if they're not structurally sound anymore, they can be used as decorative features, but the rest can be used on the ground floor, where I've decided to put all commercial aspects of my co-housing, so where creatives could have their shops, workshops, and then above in the timber frame would be the housing itself. So this is just quickly on how I found an interior grid. So before, this is the the larger grid of the street patterns. And then this is how I found that it wanted to lay out the interior grid and relate it to the exterior grid, so that the external facade mimicked the internal layout, and there was a relationship between the two. So on the ground floor, you can see it's the shops, and there's routes through, and it links to the green heart of the Broadmarsh, which would be just above it. And then also brought back the marshland to the south of the wall, which originally this wall would have been built to protect the developments later on, to bring the biodiversity back and ecological reasons. A few pretty pictures just to help you understand what I'm trying to explain. So there's the route through that was previously a horrible alley, bin alley, back of house way. So try and create it into a more of a hustle and bustling street. Shops left and right, people can still cut through, and below it there's also a cut through. They can still get through the building. This would just be columns where perhaps a market can happen once a month, where people that are using the shops, where they're using the workshops, can then sell their goods. If they're making jewelry, they can have a jewelry store right in the middle of the site, right by their home. And then this would just be one of the shops inside, a largely open plan, so that they can do what they'd like with it, essentially. And then a more private area, so the internal courtyards, internal court was on the north side of the wall, where some allotments would be for the users. And then also I wanted to layer the facade, so now I've added a balcony to kind of give the effect that the housing is set back, and then also these timber screens that are movable so that they can change them based on the time of day, the climate, if they wanted more privacy, less privacy, etc. And then going up into the accommodation, so it all follows this grid. I wanted it to be modular for easy assembly, easy disassembly, and then as we go up the floors, it kind of cuts away, etches away. And I also utilised the existing areas in the Carrington Street building, whereas Albion House is retained as the offices it is today. And then these last couple ones are the ones above Carrington Street, where it changes, which this is what it would look like. So white is existing. And luckily the levels worked out fairly all right. There was no awkward stairs. And now because creatives are all so different, I wanted a way to reflect that in the plans. I didn't just want, here's a rectangle, there you go, that's where you're living. I wanted them to be able to change it to what they would like. So, for example, Beth and Tom, they're a young professional couple, just moved to the city. Say it could be any of the people that have presented today. They just graduated, they're looking for jobs, they can't maybe quite afford getting on the housing ladder. So they need maybe a cheaper alternative and a way to also meet new people in the city if they're new. So, and then they obviously would like to change the layout to how they want by using these infill panels. So there's a couple of fixed elements, which is obviously the bathroom, and the kitchen would have to be kind of next to the bathroom for plumbing purposes, and the front door for circulation purposes. But the rest of it, they can pick where they want, including changing the facade panels, so it would all kind of be broken up into three. They could have a solid wall, glazing, or sliding doors, Juliet balconies, whatever they like. And then internally, they could add inset walls to break up the space or keep it open plan, and they'd all have these pre-made columns ready to have the walls inset into them. A quick axo of the same one, so like Beth and Tom are on the left, and then Sam, and then June is, say, a pregnant woman. But she's an artist, so she likes her art studio that she's got in her flat to be on the northern side, where she can look out over the green heart of the new Broadmarsh development. You can see Beth has slid the panels over to block out the evening sun, disrupting her laptop screen. And then onto some two beds. So Bella and Amelia would be friends from school or sisters, and they run a bakery together, so they want a larger kitchen at the back that they can cook on, but then they want a nice place to relax in their apartment as well. Will, Kate, Mike, and Zara, clearly something was going on with the royal family when I did this. They're two creative couples that have a large workshop centrally, so they wanted more open plan. And then Mayor and Dom wanted much more walls between rooms with an internal office, some more axos that can go with it, and some internal visuals. And then same again for the 3 beds, but I'll skip over them. Sections, you can see the rigidity of the superstructure. So it is kind of grid, 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 grid. But then in the elevations, you can see how the facade has changed with each apartment by itself. And then just a couple of nice images to end. Here you can, standing on one of the walkways through the marsh, looking at the development, you can see the change in materiality where the wall intercepts it. There's a few punctures through the wall that is existing to create that access. And then this is probably my favorite image, because I think it encompasses everything that I was trying to do with the marsh, the biodiversity, the keeping the brick elements in it, keeping the grid elements in it, building up, changing the materiality beyond the wall, and trying to create a nice place for young professionals and young creatives to live. Thank you.
Yes, so firstly, again, to the panel, initial thoughts and comments.
Brilliant work. I think as I was seeing those iterations, I was thinking whole life carbon, whole life carbon, whole life carbon. I'm pretty sure you had your intentions to, I mean, it was fantastic iterations actually, but in terms of allowing multiple building users to occupy the space on their own terms over the life of a building, you're just enabling the building to have a longer life. And that's just fantastic. I think more of us need to be aware of the role the structure plays in such a way. I mean, I say this primarily because where I come from, we primarily build in concrete, brick and mortar, and walls don't move very easily once they're built with brick and mortar. Whereas in Europe, you build with wood, and you can easily take out slide walls and take them away. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to learn from. But also, you mentioned the space for farmers market or like pop-up stores. Mm-hmm. That reminded me of a book, which is Living Above the Store. And I was thinking maybe this is about living near the store. And there are so many opportunities to further investigate this and maybe publish this, because again, it rounds up towards creating economic opportunities for people to flourish within their communities. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of food for thought for me.
Yeah, I really like the way you've sort of embodied the history of the site in this. And as you say, I think that image really captures it very nicely. I was wondering about sort of precedents and whether, I mean, this is reminding me a bit of like the Lilac co-housing scheme in Leeds, where they have this sort of central water-based garden. So was that a point of reference, or what were the...
We looked at loads of co-housing precedents, but there was a few. I think I found a couple in Spain. I have them on my background document. They weren't in this one. The Ronda House, I want to say, was a main precedent. It was the same kind of grid idea internally, but it was kind of just like whitewashed, and then you'd have it would be kind of set, but then you could move the furniture around a bit more easily. And there was another one, I think it was called 83 Social Housing in, I want to say Madrid or Seville, somewhere else in Spain. And that's where I kind of took the layering of the facade effect. They had still like a very rigid grid, and then they had internal balconies, and then they had this metal screen which they could grow plants up. And I kind of took the idea for the privacy of the internal courtyards, and then where they had a more like public-facing facade and then a private-facing facade. Yeah.
Maybe it was the Schroeder house.
I can't remember. It was too long ago now.
I really like the backstory you'd created for all the characters. So that was really in depth and they were believable, and that was really nice, I thought. I just wondered what the shared elements of the co-housing scheme was. I didn't really understand that.
Yeah, so there's the market on the ground floor, but this is the first floor. So the first floor, above that market, is where like the common house would be. So the workshops, the communal kitchen, the communal dining, and then above that again, you'd have the space for nurseries and the space for a communal garden. Yeah, and then obviously on the ground floor externally, there's the allotments, there's the courtyards, there's the marsh area for everybody to enjoy, but they're a bit more semi-private, whereas in that common house, everyone can access it from their balconies that go around the site. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.